Welcome, Richard. Thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
We
It's good to be here.
truly, really appreciate it. So the show's called Hollywood. How did you get here? And that's where we're going to start. How did you get here? Tell me a little bit about what made you want to become a cinematographer, where you grew up, what were your influences in the early days?
Oh my goodness. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and for all intents and purposes, Hollywood and movie making was about as far removed from my upbringing as was humanly possible to have. Um, I was just a typical dumb kid growing up in Brooklyn. Went to school, very involved in sports. I was a big baseball player. Went to college with no real clue about what I wanted to do. Um, Given my background, it probably would have ended up in law enforcement or the military or something akin to that. Um, Late in my college years, I was offered a course, came out about film. And I said, oh, this looks like an easy mark, like everybody else did. And I jumped into it. The professor was also a commercial producer director in New York City. And at some point that winter, he needed some people to come in, some bodies just to move some stuff around a set. And I stuck my hand up and I went into the stage to EUE Studios in Manhattan, and which has been a long, long time commercial studio. And there was a Mitchell BNC sitting up on a dolly, and the coolest guys in the room were the camera crew. And I just sort of naturally gravitated towards it for no particular reason, except I stepped into the right place at the right time on the right day. And something infected me at that moment.
Did you get like encouragement? Your parents all in on this, or
Oh,
I mean,
my,
I remember telling my parents I wanted to be a still photographer, and then that all evolved. But I didn't see them light up with enthusiasm for it.
I think my parents were very supportive. They were terrific, but I think to this day, neither one of them have any idea of what I do or how I do what I do. Um, it was just something that I became immediately passionate about. And from that point forward, it was just one foot in front of the other. I couldn't prescribe the path that I took to anyone. I mean, I talk to students all the time, young people all the time, and they say, how do you do this? How do you proceed? And in my case, and I think in most people's cases, it's just one foot in front of the other and trying to take advantage of everything that comes along to just stair step up a little bit further in your journey to what you want to do ultimately. Once I understood what it was about and saw what a cinematographer was and did, then I was completely hooked, and it just became an obsession from that point forward. I count myself very fortunate, because if I had gotten out of school without some direction, um, or not direction, but a passion. I think I was a type that had to really be fully committed to something. I couldn't just do something as a job just because you needed to go to work. I really needed to have a passion for something that I didn't really look at as work, and I never have. I've worked very, very hard, as we do in this industry, but I don't ever feel that I've ever had to do a day's work or go to a job that I maybe, if not dreaded, I felt just mediocre about. I've always been very blessed on that.
I mean, I think it has to be about the passion. Given the if you're inside the industry, you already understand this. But at one point, I heard somebody say, um, pay for a movie, be broke for a day, become a filmmaker, and be broke forever. It sort of it's not about the money. And I'm not saying there isn't money there, obviously, but everybody thinks that everybody in this industry is just doesn't know where to put it all.
Yes.
It's not. These are really hardworking middle class
Oh,
people
very,
who
very
are
much so.
committed to their art, committed to their jobs, committed to doing what they doing from crafty to
Oh,
grips and lighting and
absolutely, across the board.
yeah,
Nothing would get done without that.
yeah,
If
nothing.
if people just looked at what they're doing on a film or a TV series as just sort of checking off the box, just showing up and doing the minimum, the show would never get done and they would never work again.
Yeah,
That passion, I see it in so many people on my sets, and right down to the PAs who are so starry eyed. Sometimes they're brand new and they're just coming into it. But then you've got the grizzled guys who've been around forever, guys and girls who have been around forever doing their thing, who there's still a spark, even through all of the things that can tend to make you a little bit cynical and a little burned out on things. there is still a spark that animates a lot of what they do and infuses a lot of what they do. And at this point, then it's more or less a habit. People are always out there trying to do the best they can under the circumstances, try to do better under the circumstances. And I think that's really what makes everything flow.
What was your first gig? What was the first thing you did on a movie set? What was the first time you walked off and said, okay, this was a professional job?
The summer after I graduated, through that professor, I got a job on an educational series that was being shot for the New York State Education Department on nutrition for children. And it was a 12 or 13 episode series shot in upstate New York. And it was a baptism of fire. And I was able to get friendly with the camera crew. There were several camera crews that came through, and get friendly with them and get more information. And I was working essentially as a PA, but there were several PAs and we were responsible for almost everything. It was a very small, threadbare production, but the set was run well and it was very professionally managed. And I was able to hang with new people who were camera people, professionals who worked, and that was their life and their job, and really get a real taste of what it was about. And that just furthered I said, oh, I've found the right thing here. This is really good.
So you've worked in television, you've worked in film, a lot more television recently, which is always nice for your home life. But do you care? Does it matter?
Not anymore. Not for a long time. When I was coming up, that was 1979, that first job. In the 1980s, there was still this, and maybe a bit into the 90s as well, there was still this residue of a little bit looking down. Feature film people would look down on television work a little bit. There was a little a bias between two camps almost. Oh, you're in television. That was almost a separate thing. That's, my God, that has been so obliterated, and so much for the better. There's so much great work on television now, whereas features have changed, obviously, the type of film that's made. When I was coming up, we all wanted to be cinematographers to shoot The Godfather. That was sort of our ideal, and those were the types of movies that were made up to that point, pretty much. But that whole world has shifted. There's not going to be any more Godfather feature films, I don't think, not for the foreseeable future. But a lot of that type of work now has shifted over to television, and there is just the most magnificent stuff being done. I mean, I did an interview for American Cinematographer with the cinematographer of The Crown, whose name escapes me right now, and he was such a lovely guy, and Adriano Goldman. And I think The Crown is the best looking thing I have ever seen on television. It is it not?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's stunning.
And just across the board, it's one of those productions where it looks like everyone is at the top of their game in every department, and they're being given what they need to deliver that sort of thing. And what a magnificent
There was nothing about that I really wanted to watch at first.
Oh my
This was
God.
my wife wanted to see The Crown, and we watched it. And from the first shot, I'm stuck on this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not really conscious of the visuals, although that's what we think about because of what we do, and that's probably what makes them so good. But at some point, you just think this is spectacular.
Oh, I
Just
think
so spectacular.
the greatest, and I said this to Adriano, the greatest achievement is, as good as it is, it doesn't call attention to
No.
itself. It's part of the fabric of the entire effort, and that is the epitome of what cinematography should be. They used to joke about you've blown it if they come out of the theater whistling the music. Well, you don't want to come out whistling the cinematography either.
Right.
You don't want it to call attention to itself. In this case, it is so magnificently realized. I can't say enough about it.
So
Excuse me.
That's no problem. Back to when we were talking about the differences between movies and television and how it's sort of blended these days. So I watched American Buffalo 2 nights ago, which is a film you did in 90.
Oh my goodness,
something?
95.
95. Dustin Hoffman, Dennis Franz, and I loved the film. But would that film work today? And it was a film that you saw this. I watched it on Netflix or wherever it is I got it, and thought I would never see this anywhere. It's a theater film. It's a in a big room in the dark kind of movie, and clearly it was never really intended to be anything on television.
Mm.
Now everything seems to cross over, and I'm not sure why that is. Is it just because we have 60-inch televisions now and surround sound stereo? And back when American Buffaloes, we were lucky if we had 25-inch
Yeah,
televisions,
diagonal.
diagonal TVs. Is it because it doesn't communicate that way, or could you still make a theatrical version of that and for screens, or do you always make films that can translate now to home viewing?
Well, it's a tough thing because the technology has changed. Obviously, audience tastes have changed. That movie played well in a big room with an audience. It
Hmm.
really did. Um, you know, the thing that gets me is when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and this was in the 70s, films were being made by the big studios that were, we look at it now as the second golden age of filmmaking, the 1970s. There were so many great films. You look at them now, and so many of them, I mean, take Taxi Driver, for example.
Hmm.
If you walked into a studio executive's office today and proposed that you wanted to make a movie about a depressive, psychotic guy who drives a cab through Times Square, which was a wasteland at that time, you'd be left out onto Melrose Avenue. I mean, it would never be made. Yet, huge audiences were flocking to these movies, and dumb kids like myself loved these movies. We
Yeah.
went to these movies. I think the taste for that is still there. The demand is still there, but it's just been untapped. Maybe something will come along. Television has taken up so much of the slack because there's so many great stories, oddball things, and you know, things that you can explore over 8 or 10 or 12 episodes. But those types of feature films, which were mainstream fare at the time, that were just so interesting, even to neighborhood kids. And very often these movies that they would open in Manhattan, and it would be a while before they get out to the neighborhood theaters in Brooklyn, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, depending on how the first run is going in Manhattan. We'd get on a train and go into the city to see these movies. We couldn't wait a month or 6 or 8 weeks to see something. These movies were important to us. And how the culture changed and how things have evolved to the state that they're in now, there are a lot of questions to be answered there. It's society, it's values, we've got so many more things competing for our attention. Everybody saw the same movies in those days, and they were the topic of conversation that everyone shared.
Yeah.
Now there's just so much. It's become so.
This is 2020, so we've all been sitting at home watching a lot, and I'm getting recommendations for things I've never even heard of, and I think, oh, if I haven't heard of it,
Mm,
is it any good? And sometimes it's amazing.
yeah.
Yet I still never heard of it. Um, I've seen shows and films made by people I know that I didn't know they made them. And then I'm watching them. Normally, if it's somebody we know, we watch them because you're going to end up eating dinner with them and you want to say you saw it. But no, it's some crazy good stuff going on at home. But I still miss that theater thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Is theater now just Iron Man 22? I mean,
I sure hope not.
me too.
I mean, there's a poster behind you of Chinatown, and I remember seeing that as a kid, and it affected me. I didn't know at the time how it affected me because things that I see there now, I can watch, and I just watched it a few weeks ago again. Hadn't seen it in a long time, and I see certain things in it will trigger a memory from when I first saw it, and it's almost like you're absorbing something that you're going to use in the future or reference as a cinematographer in the future. And I had no idea what a cinematographer was
Yeah.
at the time. Didn't have the slightest idea. Maybe I'm being romantic about it, but I don't think so. I've thought about it a lot. And those references and those things, I would hate to think that someone is going to take their references just from a young person today, just from superhero movies.
Yeah.
Although there are some good ones.
Look, they're clearly entertaining. And yes,
Some of them are terrific.
I will-
Joker was,
but Joker was also cinematically
it
like
was brilliant.
masterpiece
It was
level.
brilliant.
It wasn't just I mean, that was spectacular. Larry Shearer.
Yes.
Yeah, spectacular cinematography in Joker. Um, that really, and a performance, obviously, but that really sold it. You walked out of Joker troubled.
Well, it's almost the Taxi Driver of
Yeah.
our time,
Yep.
you know, on a certain level, from a different angle. It is. I went to it, and I'm not necessarily a big fan of superhero movies, although I've liked a few. But this one I went to and had really no idea what to expect, and within 5 minutes, I'm in.
Yep.
I was hooked. I was in, and I just had a smile on my face through the whole thing. I said, "This is a real treat."
Yeah, really well done. It was a really great film. But that film, I still think, was one of those films that has to live in a big screen.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. I saw it in a theater,
Yeah.
and it was a magnificent experience.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that experience again. All right. So films have changed. How we do films have changed. The tools we use to do films have changed. I met you, God, 15 years ago, maybe?
More,
So we've
yeah.
been friends for like 15 years. So much has changed. We lived through the world's going 3D, which thank God they didn't. We've gone through the digital, actually in the trenches together on this film versus digital thing. Not to beat that dead horse, but the best advice I ever got about the film versus digital thing came from you. And I don't know if you said it intentionally or thought about it, but you had said in some interview, I think I was interviewing you for something else, and you said, just keep in mind that film looks as good as it will ever look, and digital will never look worse than it does today. Do you think, and that was 2011 maybe,
Mm.
do you think the look of digital has changed that dramatically? Are we getting to the point where, I mean, film still needs to be a choice, but is it that different anymore?
Well, plainly, digital, I think, has far surpassed film. I
Hmm.
mean, look at the whole object is what does it allow you to do creatively? And with film, there was quite a lot you could do, but it was limited. Certainly, it was limited. And with digital, the thing now is there's so many choices, and if you can imagine it, you can realize it. There is, I think, a certain tendency if you don't manage it properly to have a generic digital look
Hmm.
where you look at things, you go, they all look alike. They all have a sort of a veneer of sameness to a lot of them. But then suddenly you'll see something like Joker or 1917 or any number of other great examples that just you go, now there's a vision and there's a texture. And regardless of film or digital or whatever, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's the result that counts. And what's there is just exquisite in many cases. So it's a good thing.
Do you have any longing to go to a film project?
Only only in a nostalgic sense.
Yeah.
You know, I tell young students all the time, they seem to be so interested in wanting to shoot film. And I discouraged that immediately. I said, listen, film is an archaic tool at this time, and your future is unquestionably digital. Now, if you're doing it out of some feeling that you're going to learn something to apply in a digital sense, then it's great. But to do something just because you think you're going to reignite a renaissance of film use or film origination, that's just silliness.
Do you think shooting film for the sake of film is necessary? I mean,
Well,
are you on the Tarantino camp?
yeah, well, it's great to have around. It's
Yeah.
just another choice,
Right.
And if you're a Tarantino or a Chris Nolan or someone of that caliber, and you can legislate the quality and the standard that you're going to impose on the film and make sure that it's done to a T and done properly, then that's terrific. The problem in my mind is that the people that know how to do it that way, the laboratories, the post people, they're disappearing.
Yeah, the
They're
infrastructure is going
yeah,
away fast.
yeah. And you can't open a laboratory 2 nights a week and think that it's going to be consistent. It doesn't work like that. I was very fortunate early in my career to get a good and unbelievably good grounding in the laboratory. And when they were firing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that was the way to do it. And you had people in there, chemists and managers who knew exactly how to manage the chemicals and maintain everything. And that is a very, very esoteric.
That's the art of it. I mean,
That's
give it one more point of something.
and it makes all the difference in the world. 2 degrees of temperature in the bath will make a
Right.
difference.
There's
30,
there's a thing. I think of that as like chefs. My brother is a chef, and I think that his brain works differently.
yeah,
I think that I'll add a little salt and then taste it. I think he knows what it'll taste like before he puts the salt in.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't make that connection until I go, ooh, that was too much.
Yeah.
But I think it just works that way. Colorists are like that. Colorists,
Oh,
they're
definitely.
the ones that know that if you give it a one more point of magenta, that it's
Changes
going to
everything.
pop, that it changes
Hmm.
everything. And then I'll sit on my Photoshop at home and give it one more point of magenta, and everybody looks like they're sunburnt and think, why didn't I see that coming? So, but yeah, there's an art form to that.
Yeah.
So,
So, if you're going to do film, originate on film, you'd better have that side of it locked
but
down.
that generation's going away.
Oh, surely.
That
Surely.
nobody's teaching them that.
No, there's no more Art Tostados or Don Donaghy's in New York or Joey Violantes at Technicolor. I mean, these people were brilliant managers
Yep.
of laboratories, and you could sit there and discuss these things with them in the way we are now: a point of magenta, 2 points, 3 points of density, and it was a beautiful collaboration that invariably ended up with something that really felt like it had the human touch within it. And that's the thing about film. It's an organic medium, and I think it's much closer to ourselves just as beings. It sounds a little spacey, but I think it's true. Um, it is an organic medium that you can feel the handprints on. You can feel the fingerprints, the handprints. Real living, breathing people had something to do with making this happen. That's the danger with digital, is it sometimes it can feel a little bit mechanical, and yet the best examples of digital cinematography always make you feel like it's film. So
Yeah.
what does this tell us?
You know, we got a generation of kids growing up on video games. Is their emotional connection to moving images going to be different than ours?
Oh, probably. I think it's already taken place, and the aesthetic of that will certainly inform what they do in the future, and the look. They probably don't feel the same way about the digital sameness that I,
Hmm.
I do, or maybe people of my generation do, or that veneer that you can sometimes feel in certain films that were originated digitally. I'm sure that they won't have the same take on that because they don't have that early grounding in the emulsion in film that established the place from which I feel everything must deviate or conform. But that
Agreed.
would be the place or the ideal that I'm personally aiming for every time I go out to shoot something.
When you're teaching, are you how much of film history are you teaching? How
Well,
and all right, I'll make it even simpler. You've got students and you say there's one movie you have to watch. One movie of yours that you have to watch. Which one do you tell them to watch?
I don't recommend my own, but I always recommend The Godfather.
Why not your own?
Um, I
Why
don't
you
think any of them measure up.
really? Oh wow.
Yeah. I mean, I always feel like when I cringe when I see things because, it's a natural feeling. And I think I'm in good company. Conrad Hall used to say the same things. Oh, if I see something, I would want to go back and redo it. That's natural. I think writers see their stuff and so I would phrase that differently today. Everybody who does anything like this and has to live with it, then probably in your present self would go and change something in most cases. But I always recommend The Godfather, and I try to quiz them and see how much they've seen of the good canon of films that every young cinematographer should be aware of. Some are very well versed and they're very passionate. Others, there are holes in their curriculum, and I try to fill it for them. But I always say The Godfather, which has almost become a cliche to say that anymore because so many people do say it. But the movie is a film clinic, not just about cinematography. Talk about everyone being at the top of their game.
Hmm.
Boy, the part one and part two, either they're interchangeable in my mind. You could watch either one and get the same lessons. But the photography, production design, everything, right down to the tiniest detail, is just so well done. I mean, I've seen them 100 times, and every time I see them, I still see something new. I said, God, I never noticed that before.
Yeah,
How about that?
the idea that we can watch and maybe it's just us, maybe it's just the industry, but I can watch movies like I can listen to rock and roll bands.
Oh, yeah.
I can hear them play that one song over and over and over again,
And never gets old.
and it never really gets old.
Yeah.
Actually, it gets better because the memories build with the song.
Yes.
Godfather's that way a little bit too. I remember the first time I saw it, but I also remember watching it with buddies or watching it with somebody who'd never seen it before, and it starts to build that way, and it becomes more of that kind of a film. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites, but I don't think I would have answered that one.
Yeah.
I don't really know the answer to the question I just asked you
Yeah,
for me, though.
it's not,
So
maybe another day I'd give you a different take or say something of mine. I don't know.
I do know that if you don't have a passion for the films, if you can't answer that question and then even be confused about the answer to say, it's tough to pick one. If you don't have that kind of passion,
Yeah,
you are not going to succeed in this business.
very true.
You
Oh, very
whether
true.
you're a filmmaker, whether you're a manufacturer for it, if you don't have a passion for the art of filmmaking, then you're not in the business.
Well, it's the whole process, and that thing Haskell Wexler used to talk about it and say that the making of the film is really what it's about, and the relationships and exchanges that you have with the people you're working with. That's the thing that you really take away from the job.
Mhm.
And the film is a witness to that. It's a final product that's almost like an album. It's there. It's a record of what you've done, and you'll always go back to that and associate that with
Right.
what you've been doing, the relationships, the anecdotes, the moments that happened over the course of the shoot. And it's an evolution, from the very beginning, from the prep period to the wrap. It's the whole thing it's a runaway train in a lot of ways. And the evolution of that is how we grow as artists and as people, hopefully, if you're doing it right. If you've got that burning thing in your belly where you just want to absorb this entire experience and get it out of your system onto the screen.
You do. It's never a good feeling to walk off the set for the last time. Even though the film's not even close to done, when you leave the soundstage or you leave the set for the last time and you're not shooting anything else and you got everything and there's a story in there. And now you're going to go do all the hard work in terms of making it a story. It changes I don't know. You walk
Yeah.
off thinking if I got one more shot here or did one more thing here but it always works out. But
Yeah,
that's the
yeah.
hardest feeling.
I,
It's like the last day of vacation.
yeah.
You know?
On a good show where you like everyone's getting along, you like everyone, and it's been a good experience. You feel like you've turned in some good work. At the end of that, there's a certain sadness, But even on the less pleasant experiences, let's say, and there's always a few over a long career, at the end of it, I always feel sad.
Yeah.
There's like an element of melancholy, I would say, maybe not sadness, but melancholy that, okay, this is over. And, we tried to turn in our best and, we did the best we could. And now it has to live on its own.
Yeah. There's nothing you can do for
Yeah.
it.
You have to set it free.
You
so
set
to
it free.
speak.
You raised it and now it's got to feed itself.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, you and Francis Kenny did Justified for years.
Yes.
So is that the longest running TV series you worked on?
Maybe, yeah,
Probably.
probably.
Seemed like a long
Like
time.
5 or 6 years.
5 or 6, lots of episodes. Is that even harder to walk away than from a film? Or at some point do you go, okay,
We've done it.
I'm done it. Yeah, we've done it.
It's a mixed marriage or a mixed feeling, I should say. Yeah, there is a certain sadness because there's a period of your life also. The other thing, we go to work, and whether it's on a feature film or a TV series, it's a long chunk of time. And you'll always mark your life by then, by these chunks of time.
Yeah.
Oh God, that 8 months I was on this, or those 6 months or 3 months, I remember doing that there. And it's almost like you can break your life out into chapters by the things you've worked on. So after a long run on a series, there is a certain, once again, that melancholy, but then also it's often time to move on to greener pastures or new challenges, really. New challenges.
Yeah. I can't imagine, like Billy Webb does NCIS.
Mhm.
I think it's 14 seasons.
Oh, more. No, way more.
Maybe even more than that, huh?
20.
20 years maybe?
Yeah.
And he does it masterfully. He really does. And I've been on that set. Billy. You did NCIS.
Yes.
And it's like the first day every day there still.
Yeah.
They're a well-oiled machine by now,
But-
no question. But
Yeah, my experience, I was just there for a day or two filling in for Billy. He had something to do. And you could sense the perfection of this machine.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you what, I was only there for a couple of days. And I remember walking to my car to go home on the last day that I'd finished up work. And I was truly sad that day. I said, my God, what an idyllic situation. And it's not likely that I'm going to experience that again quite in that way anytime soon. Delightful people. Everything was effortless. And there was no wasted motion. It was just, you couldn't design it yourself in
Yeah.
any better way.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on a lot of sets where, day one, day two, everybody's trying to find their rhythm, especially if it's a film, because those people a lot of them work together, a lot of them haven't worked together. But on this set, and I've been there dozens of times for different things, it's everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Everybody's doing it. It was, it's an interesting show, but that's
Yeah.
like I said, maybe it is 20 years.
Oh,
Jeez.
I'm sure it is. I remember seeing something about that. It's the closest I think anyone has today to a studio job. He's
Yeah.
just basically signed on. Here I am, and I'm going to work every day with my lunch pail and turn it in. And that's pretty amazing, pretty
Yeah.
enviable, actually, on a
Yeah.
certain level.
Yeah. I know a lot of
You
people
know?
envy that guy.
Yeah.
I got to get him on. I'll call him.
Oh, he's great, lovely guy,
Yeah,
buddy.
fun to talk to. All right, so we're going to move on to our second section, which this is new to you. So the next section is going to be called craft. At that point, we might get a little bit more geeky. Might talk a little bit more about gear and a little less about where you got here and what you're going to do while you're here. So we're going to take a break here now, and then when we
Great.
come back, we'll come back with craft.
Cool.
Welcome back. We're here with Richard Crudo, and we're going to move on to the craft of filmmaking. So the craft of filmmaking is kind of the gear, but sort of what do you bring to a film? Every film I've ever worked on, every image that I've ever created, every cinematographer, no matter how many times they've used this camera or that camera or this camera and this lens, still test them like it's the first time they've ever seen them. Why do you guys do that?
I think it's a safety net, and you're trying to spark whatever it is you're trying to do in the film. Maybe sometimes you have to, sometimes you don't find it until a few days in, really. But at least it's a starting point. And, just as a race car driver, an astronaut, they're going to make sure that what they're working with is solid and is going to deliver the results. And that's just the beginning of the process. In the film days, it was real easy. It was 3 phone calls, Panavision, Kodak, and Technicolor, or CFI in the West Coast. And, you went to work, you had a limited number of lenses. Now there are more lenses around than there are moves on a chessboard. And so you got so many choices. You want to root that out. And there are so many choices with cameras, and they all essentially do the same thing, but there are peculiarities, and you need to sort those things out. And I think it's a mechanical and a artistic process, sort of a searching out, so to speak, and trying to get the train away from the station.
And what are you looking for?
Well,
I mean, I've assisted on those. I pop it up on a set of sticks, put a lens on it, you stare at it, and go, "No, I don't think so." But
yeah,
I don't know what you didn't like. I just put the other lens on.
sometimes it's just a feeling.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's just a feeling. Sometimes you have a strong idea in mind, and you want to find out mechanically how to realize that. So much of it is done in the DI suite. I mean, what we do, we capture, and I hate to use that expression, but it's image creation is the broad picture of what it is. But the camera as a capture device is only the beginning.
Yeah.
The lens and the camera is only the beginning. The real work begins nowadays in DI. In film, used to shoot tests, find a printer light, and if anyone out there doesn't know what a printer light is, and there's a lot of you probably don't, there's a great article in the American Cinematographer Manual. Will give you a lot more information than I can right now. But you'd find a printer light on which to print and keep that consistent through the film. And then as long as whatever you did on set was consistent with what you had developed in prep on how you wanted to approach the movie, your results would be pretty good each day, unless you goofed or the lab goofed.
Mm.
And that was rare, extremely rare. So nowadays, you fill up a memory card and send it down to the post house, and that's only the beginning.
Mm.
You've done tests, you have LUTs, you've got references, you've talked to the colorist, you sit with them, you work things out to a point where hopefully you have the same vision. But it's much more, there are many more options. It's much more wide ranging than film ever was. For example, I could call the lab at any time during a film project and say to the manager, looked a little warm yesterday. Why don't you take a point of red or 2 points red and 1 point of yellow out and that will cool the look a little bit. Nowadays, unless you've established that sort of dialogue with the colorist, it's a little more vague. Hey, Charlie, it was a little warm yesterday. Make it a little less so. And what does that mean? To him, it might mean a gigantic turn of a knob on the console or just a little hair's breadth of a turn.
Are you building looks on set? Do you tend to do that?
When necessary, when it feel like it's a thing to
So
do.
when you look at this image, when you look at your shot, you look at your soundstage, you look at wherever you're shooting, you have this image of what the finished product looks like before you put your eye to the cup.
Absolutely.
And how often do you get that when you're finally done now?
Well, if you can get it most of the way there, and then you're going to sit and finish it, because you're going to have now that you've been through the war and you've got an entirely different perspective, and you see the movie very often will tell you, or the project, the series, whatever you've shot will tell you what it wants to be at a certain point.
Right.
And then you can really sand off the rough edges or take it in a whole new direction. That's the beauty of the digital finishing. We've got you can establish something in the beginning and shift it in so many ways, myriad ways throughout the entirety of the production, that it's liberating and also very frightening at the same time.
And the gear has changed so much. So we're now looking at Reds and Canons and Sony Venices and Aries and Panavisions and tons of choices. Does the camera play into that image that you're thinking of? I mean, at one point you said something to me like, the punishment's got to fit the crime.
No,
which I think is definitely a Crudo thing.
I meant to say that, and it's exactly true.
Yeah, I've stolen it a lot, and it's true. And for years I worked for a manufacturer, and whenever a camera was chosen that wasn't the one I was representing, I never really felt bad about that. I thought it's not the right choice. I'm still going to this guy's movie, this woman's movie. It's because it's an artist thing. Do you think do we have enough cameras at this point? Or
oh my goodness, there are so many great choices. I mean, they're all good.
Yeah.
They're all good. They're all incredible. They do certain things a little differently, maybe. Somebody has a little proprietary color science or something like that. Maybe you're going to make a decision based on size, just mechanical, physical size of the camera. You might be working in spaces where you need a particularly small body. You may need a certain file format that works for the post pipeline. You may need any number of issues that would come into it. Among the top manufacturers, I don't think you could make a bad choice.
Right.
I mean, one way or the other, they're going to deliver. And from there, it's a post issue. How are you going to handle it in DI?
Yeah, I don't think a bad camera could actually survive. I mean, it would be like a bad Italian restaurant in New York.
Yeah.
You got a week and you're done.
Yeah.
So it has to be a good one or it's gone.
Yeah.
But I see you talking about maybe it's a choice about a small camera, and there are lots of small cameras. One of the things
or native ISO, you need something very working in extremely low light conditions, maybe available light.
Yeah.
And we've got cameras with 5,000 ISO, which is, you can't read a newspaper in that light. It's amazing.
There's a Canon camera, just to jump to my alma mater, called NME20, that gets to 4 million ISO. Yeah. It's an insane kind of concept. So yeah, you've got all those tools. But back to the light part. Was it justified that you decided to come up with the support system?
Oh, the Steadicam
with you
Air.
and Francis?
That was Francis's idea and his execution. I helped him a little bit with some suggestions and some refinements, but that came clearly out of Francis Kenny's head. And it is an incredibly simple, yet very versatile and very helpful device. It's a monopod that doesn't have any locks in order to change the height. It works by an air piston. So you press a lever and you can raise or lower the camera at will without having to fumble with any number of locks because of the segmented nature of a monopod. It dawned on me the usefulness of it one day when I was at a wedding in Maryland a few years ago. And one of the photographers in the church, poor guy, was just wrestling with the monopod through the entire service. And eventually he was moving and he tripped over it and fell down and all of his gear went tumbling. And I said, golly, if you only had a Steadicam Air, and it was still in the prep stages at that point, but I said, it's going to solve a lot of problems for those guys. But there's a heavier version that also can handle up to 25 pounds, which would cover most film cameras with a modest sized lens. And it's very handy for getting into tight spaces and adjusts very quickly. And we used to work a lot inside this motorhome, a trailer and a motorhome on Justified. And there was no way you could get a dolly or even a tripod into a spot like that. It was just way, way too cramped. And the Steadicam Air turned out to be a lifesaver.
I've got one. I've used it a lot.
Yeah.
Not just for the still stuff, but yes, they're small, they're light, but you still got to put them somewhere.
Yeah.
If nothing else, just to have a C-stand that you can lean it on and then lock it in place. All those years as still photographers, we all had pogo stick kind of support systems, especially if you're shooting sports, and you'll see it all the time, and they'll just lay it down on the sidelines.
Right.
You don't do that with a cinema camera.
No.
You shouldn't do it with a still camera, but it's sort of a different thing. But when you start putting on its side $100,000 worth of stuff that's been perfectly calibrated to hit its focus point, and you decide you should just lay it on the grass next to you.
No, that doesn't happen. There always needs to be a hand on that thing.
If it does happen, it only happens once.
Yes. And where are you working tomorrow? AC?
Yeah. So from that standpoint, it was great. Yeah, no, I still have mine and still use it. And I also found on the heavier still lenses, like the 600 mils, when you're shooting sports, you support the lens, not the body. And it works amazingly well. And to use the hydraulics to come down fast is really critical if you're shooting live sports.
Yes.
Just step on the pedal, bring it down 2 feet. You've got it set where you need to be. Tightening and untightening means you got to throw it up on your shoulder, and
it saves time
and effort. That long, but also when you shoot sports, that moment's gone.
Yes.
Without that, so
yeah, there were a lot of them at the end zones and all on the sidelines of the Super Bowl this year, actually.
Yeah, well, there will be again. I think it. I also, the first time I saw it, it felt like the first time I saw Wheels on Luggage. I thought, what took so long to come up with this one?
Yeah.
Why have I been dragging a piece of luggage for 20 years? Now all of a sudden I can roll it.
Yeah, we used to joke about that all the time. Why didn't anybody else think of this?
Yeah, it was a great thing.
But sometimes the simplest things are the most obvious, and
What other tools do you bring? Do you have any set things that are always showing up? Is there a particular filter, or are you a light meter guy, or a waveform, or just use your eyeball kind of guy?
Light meter, definitely. I can't shake that habit, and I like the notion of the light meter because it's an immutable reference. It will give you exactly what is there every single time in perpetuity. Waveforms, sure, you can check that occasionally. It seems to me that anything outside of rock solid, and you've used this since the tests. That's the thing. I use the meter for the tests especially. So you can calibrate that to the sensitivity of the sensor. And it's just like choosing your own ISO on film. Well, you choose an ISO on digital as well, according to the results that you want, the look that you want, how it serves that look. So exposure, going back to the film days, was of paramount importance always to me. And I've taken that in my mind and working methods into the film world as well. I mean, the digital world as well. Once again, it's an immutable reference that doesn't change. So if you see a deviation, it's easy to isolate and fix.
One of the other pieces of advice you gave me early on was you treat a sensor like film stock.
Absolutely.
It's just another film stock. If it's a Red sensor, if it's a Panavision sensor, if it's a Canon sensor, Sony sensor, it's all different film stock. No matter what they're rating that sensor at, it's a different film stock. And it's also a different film stock at every different ISO. So it's like a ton of different film stocks.
Well, that goes back to the testing, because that's where you need to sort that out. With a meter, with time, and a basic set of it. It's not very complicated to sort this out. It's a basic set of tests. And you'll find out everything you find out how to break the sensor,
right?
What the high end and low end is, and what's going to give you a different effect in between or anywhere in between. And you can use that to your advantage. I like to work at a single ISO. Once I've sorted that out in testing, don't be changing it around every time you hit the set and say, okay, I'm going to change, unless it's for a creative reason.
Right.
It's not so, I prefer that consistency, because it helps later in post. It just makes an easier workflow.
How do you feel about the differences between full frame sensors and Super 35?
Well, the full frame, I think, is where we're heading. Ultimately, it's
Should we be?
Well, it's sure has its appeal.
Yeah, it's pretty, isn't it?
It sure has its look and an appeal, the depth of field. There's a giant array of lenses now for that. I don't think Super 35 is going anywhere.
Yeah, because it's not just a giant. There's a
Yeah.
humongous array of
Yeah.
lenses in Super 35. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars of lenses
Yeah.
are not going out
No.
on the next cruise ship.
No, not at all. But again, as you said earlier, you choose the punishment to fit the crime. Every project dictates, and it's something always. I think that nowadays it's become much more accessible, and it's always worth a look. It's not something that's going to kill anybody's budget necessarily on a reasonably sized production, and it offers so many other options as well in post.
I'm not going to disagree, but I do know that during my career, I was around for the 5D Mark II days, where all of a sudden shallow depth of field was, production value. Look how filmic it looks, when it didn't actually, but it was shallow depth of field. And because I played a pretty good role in the rollout of 5D Mark IIs back in the day, and I saw an awful lot of movies where every shot was a nose in focus and an eyeball out of focus. I mean, I used to say, look, this is a privilege, not a right.
Yeah.
You just don't do it for every shot. I mean, I think that shallow depth of field can be really overdone.
Well, sure. And I think maybe some people, if it was an artistic choice, well, maybe okay. But I think a lot of people maybe were just sucked into the idea of it, that this is going to make it more filmic on some level. And it doesn't necessarily, again,
I think filmic is lighting, but
yeah, again, it's a combination of things,
Yeah.
and that's just one. But that look never really appealed to me. You need to have a little depth of field.
Does it also slow down your day?
Not necessarily.
No.
No, not if you're oriented towards that sort of approach. Not at all.
I mean, you've got such shallow. I mean,
It's hard on the
and hitting marks.
assistants.
Yeah, and hitting the
Yeah.
marks and all that kind of stuff.
It's hard on the assistants, but there's some great tools now. The Preston's Light Ranger
Yep.
is a fabulous tool that's going to help a lot of situations.
Yeah, and manufacturers are getting closer and closer to kind of giving you digital feedback about focus points and things
Yeah.
that didn't obviously happen in the film days of when you're there and when you're not there. And the monitors on set have gotten much better. You're
Yeah.
seeing live images, so you know what you've got and don't have. But
Yes.
shooting shallow depth of field is not easy.
No,
Yeah.
never was.
Nope.
Never was. And having done the job of focus pulling early in my career, I have an enormous respect for what these guys do. We used to just work with a tape measure and be right next to the camera, right astride the operator, and getting feedback very often from the operator, and especially on long lenses. Oh, a little closer, a little closer. Okay, you just tweak the wheel a little bit and you've got it. And you didn't know what you were going to get until the next night, or at least the next morning.
The trust you have to have for your first AC.
Oh my
for
goodness.
your focus puller.
It was an entirely different.
We worked together with John. I'm trying to remember John's last name. John Jung.
Yes.
He was black magic.
John's a terrific focus puller.
We would sit in the trailer and point to something, and
Yeah.
he'd say 6 feet 3.5 inches, and then
Yeah.
we'd hit it with a meter, and
Yeah.
it would be that.
Yeah.
I mean, I when I redo my office and have to start cutting the molding, I'm never close.
Yeah.
I'll measure it 4 times and be off by 2 inches.
Well,
But he was pretty good.
that's something that good assistants will sensitize themselves to. When I was an assistant, the last couple of years that I worked, I was strictly a Steadicam assistant. I worked with Larry McConkey and Ted Churchill in New York, a couple of other people, almost exclusively. And Steadicam means what? Actors moving, cameras moving, and you're going to be ending somewhere. And with moving camera, moving actor, the focus is constantly shifting. We used to have focus devices made from, I forget, there was a company in Philadelphia. And by today's standards, they were very, very primitive. There was a lot of slop, and you really had to watch the lens. You couldn't just watch the tape on the dial that you were holding in your hand. You had to watch the lens especially when you moved in close, to be sure that you were where you wanted to be. And that forced you to become almost as if you had a tape measure in your eye and know what 3 feet away was, what 8 feet, what 4 feet. And I used to do it just by measuring off items in my house. How far is the TV from the couch, coffee table, the wall? And then you start to make the connection. It's not that hard. You just have to apply yourself. And the really good assistants do that even today, even though they're stuck to a monitor in most cases.
All right. All right. So we're kind of getting to the end here. And we've talked about your journey and how you got here. Let's end it on, hopefully there are people watching that are looking to take that same journey, listening. They want to take that same journey. Any advice? What would you tell them to do?
You've got to be passionate. Above all, you've got to have some overriding passion to do this. It's not an easy road to follow. The passion will get you through. And then don't give up. Don't give up. There have never been more opportunities around to get into it than there are today. When I was an assistant cameraman, there was really only one route to do it, and it was coming up through the system as an assistant cameraman and operator. And then if you played your cards right and got a little lucky, you got a chance to shoot. Today, people are shooting. There were no 25-year-old cinematographers when I was coming up. There were few 35-year-old cinematographers. Today, that model has been entirely exploded. People can come right out of school and get opportunities that we could not have imagined when I started. So I would say, have that passion, nurture that passion, never give up, and be absolutely tenacious about it. And somehow or another, in most cases, I think that works.
Good. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, good. I really appreciate you coming. And it was fun. It's good to see friends again.
We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more.
Well, you know what? We can do this again.
Okay.
I would love to do that.
Well, thanks, Tim. This was great fun. Thank you.
Right.
I'm sorry for my scratchy voice. It's a little dry today, but thank you.
We'll let the editor worry about that.
Thank you.
So, all right. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.